Warmaster Boon is a 5-star card.
Hey buddy, watch this.
So yeah, that intro should come as no surprise. I played basketball in high school. That's pretty much how most of my free throws went. But Warmaster Boon was far from the only airball when we all tried to rate Rastakhan's Rumble cards before the expansion, because there were 5 that were really, really overrated by the community. And we're going to talk about those today with the help from hsreplay.net statistics. So let's go ahead and jump into the list. Up first at the number 5 spot, I have Zandalari Templar, card that I gave 3 stars, so I thought it was okay, had some playability, but probably wouldn't make a huge mark on the meta. The community ranked this card in the top 30 of all Rastakhan's Rumble cards, which is pretty good, not amazing, but still pretty good. Despite that, Zandalari Templar only being played as the 88th most popular card according to HS Replay's data, so a pretty large gap there. In fact, the 5th largest gap between all of these rankings. As of right now, Zandalari Templar underwhelming compared to expectations. Now, this is a great example of a card here that I don't think is fundamentally bad, and in fact, if Heal Paladin takes off as an archetype, a card like this could be amazing. I'm not saying, objectively these cards are bad and they'll never be played. We're just saying for now, they haven't lived up to their expectations. I'm not making a value judgment. I'm just putting them in ranked order based on the numerical findings at this point in the Hearthstone world. So save your judgments, save your hateful comments for later. I'm not making those claims. I like this card okay. I think it'll find play one day. But for right now, Heal Paladin as an archetype just has not shown up. It hasn't found that success, despite things like High Priest the Call seeing play in some OTK decks, just to give you that extra life total survivability. Cards like Zandalari Templar don't support that game plan of fulfilling your OTK just yet, because it's more of a tempo or body-based card. It's not that survivability tool. It just isn't a part of that package, and therefore isn't seeing much play right now, but I do think some hope remains. Moving on to the number 4 spot is a card that really surprised me. People apparently in the Hearthstone community loved Haunting Visions, ranked in the top 25 almost of all Rastakhan's Rumble cards, so people thought this one had a chance to see some play. I, on the other hand, gave it 2 stars, which means it just has the tiniest glimmer of hope to see play, a card that's very unlikely to be competitive. Not quite a 1-star card, but I just didn't really see anything about Haunting Visions that made sense to me. It's basically kind of a 0 mana, cycle your tempo into a spell that you probably don't need. Discovering a spell in Shaman is real hit or miss. They're not all aligned along a singular kind of plan. Some are aggressive like Bloodlust, some are control cards, some are cheap, some are expensive. It's just hard to find something that you want for your deck in any given scenario. It's more often going to be a miss than a hit in my experience, and that's why I didn't really see how Haunting Visions gives you any upside. It's not like it's a real tempo discount. You can't really bank the tempo for later like you can with a card like Farsight, where you save that discount to a future turn. You're kind of just turning Haunting Visions into a random thing. And why do you want to run a random thing in your deck? I don't know. That's why this card's only being played 93rd right now in all of Hearthstone. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. Maybe someday with Krogwa and Spirit of the Frog, it'll be necessary to, step your way up to a certain spell. But I don't even think so. There are other 3-mana alternatives that make more sense. So I think I actually got this one right. This was not a card I personally overrated, but the community certainly did, putting Haunting Visions way too high at the moment compared to its actual played rate. So here's a card I whiffed on hard, as we saw in the intro. Warmaster Boon, ranked 16th among the Hearthstone community, which is very, very good. And I'll say, most of the top 15, people got right. Like, they're cards that are seeing play. They're some of the better cards in the expansion. So Warmaster Boon really was kind of the first big whiff, or the card people thought was best, that has not seen play. Right now, falling down to 83rd for played rank, which is in the bottom half of all cards in the expansion. And when you consider just how bad the expansion is on average for played rate across the entire Hearthstone meta, that's really, really bad. Warmaster Boon's basically barely seeing any sort of play, only for people who are really forcing a dragon style of play. And even then, dragons are finding their most play in like odd warrior lists where Warmaster Boon doesn't fit. So despite the community loving Warmaster Boon, giving it great ratings, despite me giving it 5 stars, which, by the way, I came out almost immediately afterwards and said I don't really think Warmaster Boon's a 5-star card. I don't know what I was smoking when I rated him. I really think it's about a 4-star card. There was this whole mix-up where he had a different stat line and different cost, right as I was doing the review, and I like changed it at the last minute, re-recorded the ending or re-recorded the rating, and I think I just kind of lost my mind and gave him 5 stars for a moment. But in all, I just got to stick to that. Like, I got to stick to my rating. That's what I published. So that's it. I got to take that hit. I gave him 5 stars. Certainly not a 5-star card right now. I don't think it ever really will be a 5-star card. In practice playing it, your hand just gets too full sometimes, or too awkward. The dragons in the game right now available to Warrior aren't quite reactive enough. If there were like Duskbreakers out there that gave you more reactivity and were able to be played from hand a little more safely sometimes, then a card like Warmaster Boon might look better to me. But with only like Crowd Roaster and some of the tougher to use dragons, you don't just want a handful of Cobalt Scalebanes, for instance. I've experienced that lately. That can get awkward. It's hard to just play that stuff sometimes. So there are some issues getting this guy to feel good, even though the value seems off the charts. It's not quite that simple or quite that easy. Card generation is not the same as card draw. So a couple things holding Warmaster Boon back, I think, from probably ever achieving this level of success that a lot of us thought he'd find. I think it still has the potential to be a playable card, an okay card, a good card even, but not a great one. Certainly not a 5-star card. This was a big time major airball. Moving on to the number 2 spot here, I have Iphantasm, and this is a card I think will find its way into a meta deck someday. Now, I'll say that the community wasn't quite as high on this one as they were some of the other cards on this list, but Iphantasm has performed particularly poorly, coming in at 108th for its played rate. Like, nobody is experimenting with this thing at all. It's down there in the bottom of cards. Like, it's one of the worst 27 or so cards in the entire expansion. So, as far as played rate's concerned, so it's very much underperforming any expectations at all. Clearly way worse than 4 stars right now. Again, I think there's hope, but a card that just isn't finding any success in Priest, because Priest just doesn't need this right now. We have a couple different successful ways to play Priest with Xerx's Cloning Gallery or more of a dragon build. Iphantasm just doesn't fit in those worlds. You don't need to switch healing into damage for those decks to work. So until that becomes relevant, and Iphantasm can serve as that really cheap, efficient way to flip from healing to damage, which some deck might utilize for either control or raw damage output or combo, whatever it is, Iphantasm is probably not going to see much play because it just doesn't make sense as a card unless you're committing to it. So it might get stuck down there for a while, but I have a little hope that it will one day shine as a potential 3 or maybe even 4-star card as a centerpiece for some deck out there. It just seems solid, but right now it seems very bad too. And then finally here, the number 1 spot, the most overrated card according to my metrics here, is War Druid Loti. And this is one I wasn't particularly high on. Only gave War Druid Loti 3 stars. I figured flexibility means a card like this might someday see some kind of play in like a Spiteful Druid or something, just as a little fill-in piece. But I really thought, it's that old phrase, and we can argue about this in the comments again, like we always do every time I mention this phrase: Jack of all trades, master of none. It's just not particularly good at any one thing. It's just kind of okay at a lot of different things. And often that just doesn't work in Hearthstone because you need your deck to be so focused and so driven towards one goal that cards like this can get left by the wayside for things that more directly influence what you're trying to achieve. So that was a fear for me with War Druid Loti, and so far I think that has proven to be the reality for this card. It's just not a hyper defensive card, not a super aggressive card. It can be a little bit of both, but there are better options in both directions. If you want to run a Crypt Lord, just run a Crypt Lord instead of War Druid Loti, right? If you want to run some aggressive minion at the 3 spot, just run Vicious Fledgling instead of War Druid Loti. And then it kind of just doesn't look like it makes as much sense as all the other options that are out there. So the community ranked this one 19th, very high among Rastakhan's Rumble rankings, the second highest on this list, certainly. And only being played at the 96th, so barely cracking the top 100, which again is just miserable for Rastakhan's Rumble. That basically means 0 relevant play in any sort of meta deck at all. Now, 3 stars for me is still probably a little bit overrated for War Druid Loti, looking like a 2-star card right now. So maybe even I gave this one a little bit too much of a bump based on community sentiment or just, potential value. Time will tell whether it's really a 3-star card or not for me. I don't know. Again, not trying to make an objective value statement about whether it's good or not. Just right now, War Druid Loti has been the most disappointing of any card in Rastakhan's Rumble. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for my 5 most overrated Rastakhan's Rumble cards. Now, I'm curious, what cards do you guys think are overrated that maybe weren't captured in the comparison between these 2 data sets? Maybe something that was ranked in the middle and just absolutely looks miserably, terribly bad, or maybe something that's, ranked fairly high and still seeing a little bit of play, but still didn't quite live up to expectations just based on your subjective interpretation of how people viewed it, or maybe cards that you got right or wrong, cards on this list that you came out and said, this is going to be a terrible card. I can't believe people love it. I want to hear all those thoughts in the comments below. But until then, thank you so very much for watching, and until next time, game on.